Let's talk Lopi sweaters. So welcome back to any returning viewers, and to any new viewers a very warm welcome to you. So we're talking Lopi sweaters this week. Specifically, we're talking my plans and my concepts for a Lopi sweater project that I've been intending to make for a little while now. So when I went to Iceland on honeymoon, I knew I wanted to get some Plutta Lopi. So I've had this project in mind for some time. So today we're going to talk about what a Lopi sweater is and why what I'm actually making is an inspired by Lopi sweaters garment rather than technically a Lopi sweater, but more on that in a bit. So Lopi sweaters are Icelandic sweaters, they're traditional Icelandic sweaters. Lopi Sweater, I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly, but that's the Icelandic word for it, which means sweater made of Lopi yarn, or sweater made of Lopi. So the Lopi is the yarn. It's an unspun or lightly spun yarn, depending on which variation you get. The Plutta Lopi is unspun. So it's yarn from an Icelandic sheep. They were brought to Iceland. They're not native to Iceland. And they've been used for goodness knows how long, for clothing and food and all that kind of stuff. When you're in Iceland, particularly if it's in the summer, you'll see them just wandering around freely, free rein, across the island, wherever they want to go. They're not fenced in or anything. There's no predators for them on Iceland. So they are just free to wander, and you'll see them by the roadside in smaller groups than you'll see in the UK, for instance. We tend to have quite large flocks being moved from field to field to find the grazing. Whereas in Iceland, they just free rein. So you'll see one or two sheep, or you'll see a little family of sheep, not the big flocks that you get here. So in the 20th century, early to mid 20th century, Icelandic women predominantly were knitting sweaters, and they started to knit with the prepared fibre direct from the combs rather than spinning it first, as that saved time. Obviously, warm sweaters are quite important in Iceland. So they developed this technique of working with unspun fibre to create these sweaters. And they do follow a pattern. In terms of their structure, we'll be talking more about structure a little bit later on in this little mini series of videos on this particular project. So my plan is to knit a Lopi sweater, or a Lopi style sweater, as closely as possible to the traditional form. So it's a form of folk art in Iceland. Now I'm using as my reference this book that I got on honeymoon. I picked this up in Isafjordur, which is in North Iceland. It's the Lopi Sweater knitting book by Greta Sorensen. So it's got history, it's got techniques, and it's got some patterns in here. So I'm going to be doing my own numbers, my own pattern to knit up a sweater out of my Lopi yarn. But this is my guideline. So if we turn to the history of the Lopi sweater section of the book, so it's got lots of information, but it's also got these lovely pictures of Lopi sweaters in the book as well. Some black and white, some colour. So the wool that the sheep produce is ideally suited to Icelandic weather, as you would expect from the breed that has been raised in Iceland for quite some time. So it's brought over by Norse settlers, so it's been there for centuries. It's not a modern import to the country, but when people settled Iceland, there weren't sheep there. So the Lopi yarn itself is also a 20th century creation. It's not a centuries old tradition of that particular type of yarn being used, which is why this tradition of the Lopi sweaters only goes back to the early mid 20th century. So it's a relatively new tradition as traditions go. But we're in a world that's ever changing, so we're going to see new traditions pop up all over the time. So this book, in its history section, does refer to the patterns and the designs of the Lopi sweater. So I'm just going to read a little bit of that for you. It talks about Lopi sweater as a folk art as well. I'm just not going to read all of the book because copyright. So initially, many people probably contributed to the design of the Lopi sweater. Consequently, it is in fact the result of a joint effort of women knitting simultaneously in distinct parts of the country. So that's quite it. That's kind of how folk art develops. Different people in different places putting their own spin on it, and it kind of grows and comes together. So the origins of the diverse pattern of Lopi sweater are varied and depend on the source from which the knitters sought their inspiration. During this period, so that's the early 20th century, cottage industry was developing into what is known today as applied arts, which seek inspiration from the cultural heritage of the nation. So it's very tied into the local customs, the local traditions, the local beliefs, and the history of the country as well. What I did notice when I was in Iceland is a lot of the Lopi sweaters that are produced will have a band with animals on. So there were horses, there were puffins and all that kind of thing. I'm going to go for a little bit more of a geometric design, which is in keeping with the traditions as well. But I did notice that alongside the geometric designs, you are getting more graphic designs as well. So in addition to talking about the history and the culture and the art side of the Lopi sweater and the yarns, this book does go into the characteristics of what makes a Lopi sweater a Lopi sweater. And this is where we'll see how clearly it is that I'm not making an actual genuine Lopi sweater. I'm making a sweater inspired by the Lopi sweaters, the Lopi pacers. So this section of the book has a lovely picture of some Icelandic sheep. So we've got like a chocolatey coloured one and a creamy coloured one there. And that's important because traditionally the sweaters would be made with undyed fibre. So as the book says, typical Icelandic Lopi sweater is hand knitted with Icelandic wool in either natural or dyed colours. So a bit of a mixture. Initially the Lopi sweaters were generally knit with a 3-fibre Pluta Lopi. Later it became customary to knit with a 2-fibre Pluta Lopi. And at present, Lopi sweaters are also knitted with a 1-fibre Pluta Lopi, or with Pluta Lopi and something called einband held together, so that'll give it a bit more strength. However, gradually the production of Lopi has become more diverse, and at present, Lopi sweaters are knitted with any of the miscellaneous types which are produced from Icelandic wool, including let Lopi. So pretty much any Lopi yarn. I've got Pluta Lopi, I believe it's a 1-fibre Pluta Lopi. But even if it's a 3-fibre or a 2-fibre, it's still in keeping with traditional use. And I've got a mixture of undyed and dyed Pluta Lopi to work with. We'll take a look at that in a bit. The typical Lopi sweater is hand knit and worked from the lower edge in the round with a yoke containing a circular patterned shoulder frame comprised of a 2 or 3 threaded diverse colour pattern. Traditionally, a thin pattern is added subsequent to the cuff on the body as well as sleeves. This is, however, optional, and the patterns in this book don't do that. I'm going to, but they don't. At least I'm planning to. Plans may change, but that's my initial thoughts. So yeah, circular yoke worked from the bottom up, rather than the top down, all-in-one construction that a lot of patterns have now. That's not unusual. I mean, fair R sweaters were quite often done that way as well. So the bodies and the sleeves would be worked from the cuff up on a knitting machine and then the yoke picked up and knit by hand. Whereas the Lopi sweaters are hand knit items traditionally. You can get Lopi style sweaters in Iceland that are machine knit, but you can also get an awful lot of hand knit Lopi sweaters, which seem to be fairly priced for being a handmade product, in that the price reflects the amount of work that's gone into them. So according to this book, and I believe according to the Hand Knitters Association of Iceland, I haven't looked further into whether it's like a legal acknowledgement or something, but they consider the Lopi sweater to be a geographically specific product. So that means in order to call your sweater a Lopi pacer or a Lopi sweater, it needs to meet certain requirements, and they've been listed under the product label section. So the Icelandic Lopi sweater is a protected product label. This means that in order for a particular product to be labelled Lopi sweater, it needs to represent aspects which, according to tradition, can be considered archetypical of the Lopi sweater. So that means it needs to be hand knitted in Iceland. It needs to be made of Icelandic wool from an Icelandic breed of sheep, made from new wool, so not recycled wool, have a round yoke pattern, and must have been worked seamlessly in the round, but it can be either open or a whole, so a cardigan or a pullover. And it's the Icelandic Hand Knitting Association that maintains the production and the sale of Lopi sweaters produced in Ireland. So they've worked really hard to get this protected label status, and it's actually from them that I bought my yarn. And so the one thing that stops my version being a true Lopi pacer, a true Lopi sweater, is that I'm not currently in Iceland. I'm in the UK. So it's going to be hand knit. It's going to be worked with new wool from an Icelandic producer, from Icelandic sheep. It's going to have a round yoke, and the plan is to do it as an open sweater, so it'll be worked in the round seamlessly and then steeked. Okay, so that's the overview of what a Lopi sweater actually is. So let's think about designs themselves. And as I say, I am planning on doing mine as a cardigan, an open front Lopi Sweater, and I'm going to be planning on putting a zip in. So I obviously haven't bought the zip yet. The reason for that being that you need a zip that matches the length of your finished and blocked garment, so that your zip fits the garment, not the garment fitting the zip. There is information in this book that tells you how to put zips in for knitting, because I've not done that before, so it'll be an experience. The book includes patterns for children's Lopi sweaters, women's Lopi sweaters and men's Lopi sweaters. So there are 3 women's designs in here, which I'm going to show you some pictures of just so you get a sort of sense of where we're going. So these are all 3 of the women's designs. You can see some of the kids' designs in there as well. So there are patterns included for those. And at the back of the book, she has included grid paper that you can scan and photocopy for child's, toddlers, women and men's, whether you want it closed or open. They've got versions for that. So toddlers, children's, women and men's, which means that you can make your own design completely, or you can adapt one of the ones that she's put in the book. So it's a nice little resource book, all sorts of information on there, techniques as well, hints and tips of how to use the yarn, that kind of thing. So for my Lopi sweater, or my Lopi inspired sweater, I have shown you this yarn before just after we got back from honeymoon, but let's take a little look at it again. So I've got Plutter Lopi, which is sold in a plate. I am guessing that the Plutter part of the name means plate. Now when you buy it by weight, and it's all stacked up, and you just pull off what you want. So just finding the main colour that wasn't still attached to the rest. So this is my main colour, so this is oatmeal yarn, so this is undyed yarn. And then I have 3 colours of contrast yarn for the yoke. So my plan, I'm going to check how much weight-wise I've got of each of these. Although this is obviously the biggest contrast, it feels like there's less of it. So I might need to be a little bit cautious. It feels like I've got most contrast colour-wise of this one. But yeah, I'm going to weigh it, check the yardage that I've got by weight, because the information is online as to yardage. Because the way they sell it, it's not labelled, so I don't have the colourway names and I don't have yardage information with the yarn. So I will need to just double check that, because I need to know my yardage for my calculations of how to make it. So that's my yarn. It is unspun. I'm going to be holding it on its own. So if we look at the dark ones, it's going to show up the best. You can see how sort of light and floofy it is. But it's not like thin, so if I knit it on a sensible size needles, it's going to be quite airy, which means it'll trap the air and that'll keep the warmth in when you're wearing it. My gut feeling, this bit's come off, so we'll just look at that a little bit closer. My gut feeling is that pulling from the outside is going to be the way to go, because it does break quite easily. It will also split splice, so I'm not worried about it breaking. But I think pulling from the outside is probably more sensible than pulling from the inside, so it's not like constantly breaking with tension and what have you. So that's the yarn, it's the history and the culture and all that sort of stuff about the sweaters. So what am I planning to do? What's my idea, my concept for my design? So as I mentioned, I'm planning on making an open front, so a cardigan style sweater with a zip front and with a more sort of geometric style of colourwork. So I had a little bit of a dabble in Procreate, and this is a rough idea of what I've got in my head. It's not dissimilar to one of the patterns in the book. It's not dissimilar to, if I just find it again, to this one here, which is the ice drops pattern. So there's a better picture of it there. So that means that once I've worked out my numbers, I can use this pattern as a guideline for the colour work. This one does have 4 colours in, and I'm only going to be using 3 contrast colours, so there will be a little bit of changing to do. So I will graph it out new. So I'll either scan and print out the grids from the back of the book, or I will just use Excel, which is normally what I use for colour work and that kind of thing. So my next steps, and if you want to knit along with me and make your own colourwork sweater that you design and come up with the counts and the numbers yourself, this is what we need to do next. We need to settle on our design, our idea, our concept, not like the numbers and exactly how many stitches or any of that. That's going to come next week. But we need to work out what we want to achieve, what the overall look that we want to go for. We need to get some yarn, and we need to get some gridded paper, whether it's actual printed out gridded paper or an Excel sheet, doesn't matter. We need to do a swatch. So I am going to take the main colour, so this colour, and I'm going to do some swatching with that. I'm not entirely sure where my 4mm needle tips are. I do have 4mm DPNs, so I might just do some swatching with those. And I might do some 3.75mm swatching too. I'm going to check what she reckons in the pattern, but I think she's holding yarn double or using a different type of Lopi yarn. So I might see if I want to do the same needle size as she uses, because I'm going to need the swatch to work out how many stitches and all that kind of thing. Yeah, I need to have a little hunt around to see what needle size she suggests, because the way she's written it, the instructions aren't with the patterns as such. It's the colourwork chart, because the main body is going to be the same. Ah, there we go. 3.5 and 4.5mm she suggests, but she's using Let Lopi, which is yarn that looks like that. So I'm using a different type of Lopi. I think 4mm is probably going to be about right. So I will try that. So next week we'll need our swatches blocked and dried. We'll need a tape measure, because we'll be taking some measurements, and we're probably going to need a calculator, as well as anything else that we want for planning. So something to write down your numbers, something to graph out your colour work on, that kind of a thing. So that we're all ready and prepped to go to get the actual nuts and bolts and the mathsing of design done. So thank you so much for spending time with me today. I look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, there's this video here that may be of interest to you, and I will see you soon. But until then, happy crafting and bye-bye for now.